Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you also for that kind introduction. To kickstart our panel, why doesn't everyone introduce themselves by giving their name, the Bloomberg School of Public Health degree program that you graduated from, and your current position and organization?
All right, I'm happy to go first. My name is Adam Williams. I'm a 2013 graduate of the Department of International Health at a concentration in global disease epidemiology and control with an MSPH. Currently, I'm at Pfizer. I've recently joined Pfizer as a director of mRNA commercial strategy and innovation.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosa Bazin. I graduated in 2018 from the PhD program in health policy and management, specifically in the health services research and policy track. And currently I'm the director of data science and analytics at a health tech startup called Amino Health.
Thanks.
Great. And my name is Maneet Kaur. I graduated last year from the Department of Epidemiology with a PhD. I currently work as a quantitative scientist for a company called Flatiron Health. I'll popcorn it back to you, Alyssa.
Awesome, thank you. And it's wonderful that we have such a diversity in like panelists, and also such a diversity in like the departments that you all graduated from. All of us come from different departments, so yeah, we all can shed different perspectives on like our experiences in health tech and our desires to learn more and expand our careers in that area. Next, how about let's start with Rosa. Can you all give a brief summary of what you work on in your position related to health tech? In other words, like if it's difficult to give like a summary, can you describe like a typical day in your position? And if there is no typical day, can you share like an example of a project or an analysis that you recently worked on?
Sure. So I think you're right. There is probably no typical day for any of us, but briefly, Amino Health does a variety of things, but the core aspect of the business is a health guidance platform. So an actual platform that if a user has access to Amino through their employer, they can go in and find a primary care doctor, specialist, imaging center, et cetera, any type of care that they need through our platform. We already have their insurance information in there. And so we'll list, let's say if you're looking for a PCP, a number of providers, and we kind of rank them by cost and quality, which there's a lot in there that I can get into later. But because our core product is a platform, there's lots of engineering and technical work within Amino, and I sit in the engineering department. There are about 20 of us. I lead the team of data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, and analytics engineers. So a big part of my role is to be an engineering manager. So I would say a lot of my time is in meetings, either with individual contributors, ICs, or with senior leadership when we're making decisions about products and projects. And then another big portion of my work is more technical. If we're trying to solve a specific methodological problem, I'll put on my research scientist hat and look through the data and talk about different approaches. So yeah, I would say management is a big part of the work, and also just like moving products forward and making decisions about what we can technically do and what trade-offs we have to make.
Very nice, thank you. How about you, Maneet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So briefly, Flatiron Health is a sort of a two-sided company. One side is Flatiron has an electronic medical record system specifically designed for oncology clinics. And then the other side of the business that I work on is curating that data for research. And so I specifically work on how we can leverage that data to inform the design of clinical trials, of oncology clinical trials. So my day, I would say, is I'm pretty early in my career, so a lot of my work is technical. I would say 40 to 50% of my work is kind of what I would do as an epidemiologist. A lot of scientific analyses, working out variable definitions. 20 to 30% of it is the the data, the coding of the data, the coding of analyses, and the rest is sort of falls into this strategy business bucket, meetings, business sort of strategy-based decisions, cross-functional collaboration. So I would say it's a relatively good mix as to what I was really trained for during my PhD right now.
Very nice. How about you, Adam?
As I said, I'm at Pfizer, of course, a large pharmaceutical company, and I sit within the mRNA team, which has expanded over time given the response to COVID-19. And specifically, I sit within the commercial strategy and innovation team, which is also a new team within Pfizer, really responsible for the overall strategy and sort of ushering in of new assets from early stage preclinical stages all the way to later stage clinical development. And as part of that, kind of identifying the value to Pfizer, the value to patients, the value to health systems, and working between different stakeholders to assess things. So, for example, my work now focuses on, and given my background, mRNA vaccines and the application of mRNA to broader infectious diseases of outbreak or pandemic potential. And so I work between R&D, our vaccine research and development colleagues, to assess, for example, the feasibility of vaccine development for certain pathogens. And on my side, assessing the potential market of those, thinking of things around epidemiology, the burden of disease, the geography, the transmission, et cetera, et cetera. In addition, I lead our work around pandemic preparedness strategy, and that's really the application of the mRNA platform to preparedness in the future for the future pandemic. And so that involves, strategizing with our manufacturing colleagues to consider the use of manufacturing capacity and working with our market teams to think about how to best utilize that in the future.
Very cool. Fascinating to hear about how different like each of your roles are within health tech as a whole. So it'd be interesting to hear about what motivated you to pursue a career in health tech and what steps you took, both as a student at the School of Public Health and afterward to get to your current position. How about we start with Maneet this time?
Sure. I think it's relevant because I joined this company just about a year and a half ago, so very fresh to this process. I think what really motivated me was really exploring the different opportunities as an epidemiologist, and health tech was one of those spaces. I think generally you can think of government, academia, pharma, med device, other sort of, there's a whole world that an epidemiologist could work in. And health tech was at the space that had a really nice value alignment for me because it sort of linked whatever I was doing was servicing a product that I knew helped patients. So the electronic medical record system, or the fact that the work that we do helps advance the development of treatments faster. And I think part of that really came from talking to different people and understanding the pros and cons of the jobs in different areas. And I found that Flatiron Health specifically was very specific, relevant to kind of my experience, which was in cancer epidemiology, and had a really nice work-life balance, just career growth that I envisioned aligned well. And we have quite a few Hopkins alum that have come to Flatiron, and connecting with them really helped inform my path as well. So I think really it was just evaluating the pros and cons of these different industries and what really aligned with my values.
Nice. I know at least one alumni of the biostats department who's now at Flatiron Health. So very cool. How about you, Adam? What motivated you to pursue a career in health tech?
Yeah, so before I came to Hopkins, I'd actually worked in public health communications and worked with different pharmaceutical companies, but also larger foundations like the Gates Foundation, but all around already focused on health technology at that time. But I really felt like I wanted to get deeper. And when I went to Hopkins, I really learned a lot more about, in particular, vaccines, and focusing both on the development of vaccines, but also delivery. And my career is really kind of, since I left Hopkins, meandered a little bit between both of those. I've worked more downstream in delivery. I worked with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, for example, on delivering new vaccines in low and middle income countries, and then have since actually gone a little bit more upstream on the side of vaccine development and thinking about new targets for new technologies. For me, it really fits in with my values and interests, both related to innovation and access. I think importantly, or of interest to me certainly, is that we have new technologies to be able to innovate new treatments, new preventatives for patients. There's always the challenge of then how do you get those to the people in need. And so I've been interested in touching both of those in some way in my career.
Very important work. How about you, Rosa?
Yeah, so thinking back, so I was in the PhD program, so I had about 4 or 5 years to really think and evaluate what I wanted to do when I was done with my program. I would say for the students in this session, there's so many opportunities that you have when you're in graduate school that you won't have when you're not in graduate school. And so I really encourage everyone to try different things, like work on a research program, in like different types of research programs if you can, join different clubs, go to conferences, go to talks. Those things really help you discover what you're interested in and what you're not interested in. That's part of what helped me make a decision to go into health tech is, I'd work on qualitative research projects, quantitative research projects, and realize like, I find it interesting, but I don't love the practice of sitting in front of my computer for hours a day and then drafting research papers. It was a very useful skill, but not something I wanted to spend my time doing after I graduated. But I found that, when I was TAing a class, like I really loved that. I really loved talking to people and giving them feedback and being interactive in that sort of way. And so what led me to health tech was just also identifying what I didn't want to do. And I realized like a path in academic research or working for a think tank wasn't a great fit. And fortunately for all of us in the healthcare industry, there's so many opportunities. So I started to look outside of sort of the more traditional pathways, and had always been a little bit involved in health tech, even 10 years prior to graduating, and I always found that really fascinating, like trying to solve problems with technology. And so about a year before I graduated, I just started reading a lot about health tech companies, and I would see, I would go on different websites, try to understand what they were developing. They're all, the market is healthcare, which is what our expertise is. They're building products off of data, which is really what your mastery is around in like in a PhD program in particular. And so I was like, oh, there should be so many healthcare PhDs or MPHs in these health tech companies. And there really wasn't at the time. It was a lot of MDs, a lot of MBAs, which made sense. But I was like, our skill sets are so aligned. And also these health technology companies are going to have such an influence on the way that healthcare is delivered in the country. Like we should really have hopefully lots of experts from the public health space in these areas. So I just started networking as much as I could, talking to people, and I realized that the type of work that people did in health tech really aligned with what I enjoyed. There's lots of like technical thinking and problem solving, but also collaborating with people with different skill sets. You learn a lot. It's a very fast-paced environment, which I enjoy. So yeah, I think it was just through the process of identifying what I didn't enjoy, identifying what I did enjoy, and then also seeing sort of how my skill sets aligned with what was in demand in the health tech space.
Wow. That was a phenomenal answer, Rosa. Thank you so much. I really second your point about networking. Like, that's the one thing that I kind of wish that I had done differently in earlier degree programs, and that I hope to improve on in this current degree program. Also, you offered a lot of other really actionable and helpful advice for students considering pursuing a career in health tech and what they can do now. Maneet and Adam, if you have any additional advice related to what a student can do now, or Rosa, even if you have any other additional gems that you can add to your other answer, it would be great to hear that.
Yeah, I can expand upon my sort of advice into what led me to health tech, which was literally just talking to people. I ended up having a friend of a friend who was totally unrelated to the PhD program, who had a sister who's an epidemiologist and was in like a medical device company. And I had, never heard of an epidemiologist sort of working in that situation. Ended up having a chat with her, and she kind of opened up my view of the world in terms of health tech. And so that's actually what opened me to the opportunity of a company like Flatiron Health. And coincidentally, she's actually now at the same company that I'm at. So it's a really small world, and you can really learn a lot just by talking to people in different career paths. So I would encourage just making sure you take the opportunity as a student to talk to people in different career paths, because it really is valuable.
And I would certainly second that in terms of talking to people in different career paths. And I think when I think about my experience at grad school, there aren't a whole lot of times in life when you can walk down the hallway and talk to any expert in any field and make a connection. Because often when you enter the working world, it's much harder to do that. So it's a great moment in time to take advantage of the environment that you're in, and as part of that, identifying really just any event or any opportunity, any way that you can cross paths with different people, because that is going to really help inform your thinking. The second thing for me that I thought a lot about when I was in school was, okay, how do I identify where I want to be? And then how do I identify what skill sets I need to get there? For me, I had really wanted to sharpen my quantitative skill sets. So I tried to double down on coursework, for example, at Hopkins. And so being specific about that and thinking about what you'll come out with is also helpful.
Adam, I really liked your answer to this question too. And I especially love the part where you emphasized how it's such a rare and amazing opportunity to be able to talk to experts in like so many different fields in public health while you're here. And I'm wondering which resources at the Bloomberg School of Public Health were most helpful for you to connect with in pursuing a career in health tech. And also Maneet and Rosa, feel free to answer this question too.
Well, I think generally, as I said, finding any event that you can go to is helpful. It was a place where I was amazed that there was something almost every day to go to and explore. When I think about the coursework that was really important to me and the connections, as I mentioned, I had worked in vaccines before, but really had kind of gotten a lot deeper when I was at Hopkins. And Dr. Neil Halsey's class, for example, on vaccine development was really instrumental and something that I have carried forward in just about every position that I've had since then. I've also found it really helpful to try to apply skills from even courses that maybe aren't specific to what I do now, but yet I found very useful. So another one was I had really focused on large scale effectiveness evaluation or evaluation of public health programs. And I found that a lot of the thinking and the strategizing, the frameworks that we used in a course like that can be applied in a business setting, in a tech environment. And often it's very valuable in that way because it brings in different thinking. And so I think trying to take courses in the same light in terms of discovering new things and better sharpening your skills is really the way I would think about it.
Thank you.
Can add, there was some, I think the counseling, the Career Center offered sort of one-on-one career advice. And I found that to be incredibly valuable because it, one, kind of gave me accountability and put me on a path to making sure I achieve certain tasks. And part of it was just CV review. Part of it was advice on job hunting, networking. For example, one key piece of advice one of the career counselors gave me was, if you're interested in networking with people, one thing you can do is find people through LinkedIn that also maybe have connections to Hopkins or went to Hopkins, reach out, talk to them, learn about their job, and then perhaps talk to them about their job. And that to me was incredibly valuable. I didn't realize that was a thing. And when, I started getting people talking to me, and I love talking about myself. Most people love talking about themselves. And so it was actually really a really fun experience. And I think one thing that folks should take advantage of while they're at Hopkins, the Career Center's got some great folks, and really take advantage of them.
Yeah, I agree with what both Adam and Maneet said. I will also add, I love that this session exists, that there's like a series on careers in health tech. I don't think there was something like this when I was at Hopkins, and I would have found it to be very valuable. So thank you to everyone who organizes these. Yeah, something that Adam said really resonated, which is like thinking about the skills. I think if I was in a program now, I would look at the type of jobs that I wanted if you are interested in health tech, and kind of work backwards and see like, okay, what skills are required for these roles? What do I have? What do I not have? And fill in those gaps. I know as a hiring manager, for technical roles, obviously like the data analysis, methodology, biostatistics, like those things are so core. Your programming skills are so valuable. So if there are classes in SQL and Python, those are languages that are used more in health tech, at least in the spaces I've been in, than like Stata and SAS. I would take those classes. Any biostatistics classes you can take are so valuable. You can learn a lot of things outside of an academic program, but a lot of the value I got from Hopkins was methods, biostats classes. I think policy classes are really important as well, depending on the type of space that you want to go into. So really taking advantage of the expertise that you have and the classes that you have. I highly recommend that. There's lots of boot camp courses for people in data science outside of graduate school, but I think the foundations you get in grad school, it's like hard to compare those two things together. So I recommend taking advantage of that. And then yes, go to talks and as many things as you can. And then something I didn't do, but I wish I had explored, was maybe seeing what the business school at Hopkins is doing. I imagine there are students or groups or courses related to health technology or the healthcare space there. And I think having a little bit of that business background will just help you understand how things are structured and organized in the health tech space, because they are businesses, right? And it's very different from the sort of structure and like drivers that we have in public health. So I would recommend that as well.
All of those were excellent points, and all of you gave excellent points. Thank you so much. One thing that I noticed as you all were discussing skills is that it's one thing to have the skills, and it's another thing to convey that you have the skills to employers. So how would you recommend leveraging your experience as when you were graduate students and advertising your skills and talents effectively when applying for positions in this area?
I'm happy to jump in first on that. I think that when really, you probably couldn't apply this to just about any position, but I think often hiring is half around the knowledge and the competencies that you have, the degrees, the things on paper that we're really often very focused on. And that relates to the skills that I spoke about earlier. Certainly you want to make sure that you get what you need to be successful in your next path. The other half of it, though, is around leadership and behavior, and being able to demonstrate that you can lead in a certain space, and that you understand the space, that you have in some ways emotional intelligence, for example, to be able to navigate within a certain environment. And so those pieces maybe are add-ons that I would certainly say that you should consider in interviewing, but also just how to build your skill set in those ways, because those are really important to get your foot in the door, often for interviews, and to then move forward into getting new positions and then be successful within the careers.
I second the need for emotional intelligence and development of that skill in particular. Manit and Rosa, what would you like to add to his answer?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because it is really true. You need to know you need to have your science and your skills and your technical knowledge, but most of it is actually in how you communicate it. And a lot of that comes from practice. We don't really put ourselves in situations where we have to practice giving like a scientific explanation in 30 seconds or less, because we're constantly around other scientists, right? So I think a really good practice in interviewing is actually just like doing those practice interviews, looking at resources on how to interview. The sort of consulting framework for interviewing is really intensive. I don't know that you need to follow the whole thing, but it does give you a really nice structure on how to map questions that you get and how to break them down and explain your thinking verbally as you're going through questions. Because oftentimes that's how interviews go, is you're given a problem and they want to see that you can break down your thinking out loud and just see that your critical thought, you can communicate it. Because if you're all going through programs at Hopkins, you've got the knowledge. It's just learning how to communicate it for a different audience.
Thank you, Manit.
That's a really, sorry, Alyssa, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just saying thank you, Manit. Go ahead,
Okay.
Rosa.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I agree with all of that. So just to add some context, I've now had the opportunity to be on the other side of applying and see what it's like at some companies. And in case this context is helpful, I will say, it's often a recruiter, not necessarily the hiring manager, that's going through the initial round of applications. And sometimes there's 1,000 applications for one role, sometimes there are fewer, but essentially I would say you have to do the work for the recruiter. Don't assume that someone's going to spend 5-10 minutes with your resume or your cover letter trying to understand how you're going to fit. You have to make it as clear as possible for them and really adapt yourself to the role and make those connections so that they'll look at your resume and be like, okay, this is a good person, I'll talk to them. And then that will give you the opportunity to have that conversation and make that connection and really explain what your skill sets and talents are. So it is quite different depending on the type of tech company you're applying to from an academic environment. Like resumes are often 1 to 2 pages, not longer. Some people might not immediately understand how your skill sets from Hopkins are applicable to a tech company. Sometimes it can almost work against you. That's the sense I've gotten, is like, oh, you're an academic, you're not going to make sense in this space. So not to be discouraging, but just keep that in mind as you position yourself for these roles. And I would say, and I think it's changed a lot since I first applied, but getting that first role in a health tech company may be the hardest leap. And then once you're in, it'll be easier because they're like, okay, you're already used to this environment. So don't be discouraged, keep trying, but yeah, that first jump might be the toughest.
Thank you. Yeah, I've heard that to be a common thing with a lot of different highly sought after industries, that once you're in, it's a lot easier to move up, but the hardest part is getting in. So I know that some students attending this webinar may not be like 100% set on pursuing a career in health tech. They're exploring this and an array of other fields to potentially go into for internships or after graduation. What advice would you give these type of students, this type of students, for exploring careers as a master's or PhD student?
I'll say this again. Talk to people with that role of interest if you can. That gives you an idea of whether you want to do it or not, but also it gives you potentially, like, if you can make a connection, like a mutual connection, it gives you a potential in for a referral that bypasses a lot of the filtration that happens when you apply to a job. It's sometimes hard to even get to that step where a recruiter is even looking at your resume. So if someone can speak to like your abilities, they knew you in school, and or someone else knew you in school and can speak to your abilities to that person, a referral can often help just get you that interview or that internship. But again, that a lot of that comes from just cold calling sometimes. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Great advice. Thank you. Adam or Rosa, anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo talking to people. I think we've said that, several times, that it's really important, even if you're able to talk to someone for 10 or 15 minutes, you come prepared to a conversation like that, you can make a strong impression and you can answer questions that you have in your mind. I think secondly, as we talked about, take advantage of any opportunities that you can. I would say in particular, there are a lot of external conferences that in a way, we're lucky now that many conferences are hybrid, or there's an opportunity to attend virtually, or there's scholarships available for students to be able to do so. So I would say find something in your field or that you're interested in and go and listen and learn. And even through those platforms can make external connections. And I think the third thing is be patient, because for me, I didn't jump directly from grad school into the company that I am today. But you can think about what positions that you might want to get that actually help you demonstrate your skills, build your leadership, do those things that are stepping stones that might actually get you to where you want to go as well. So, think about it in the long game and where you want to be in maybe one or two more positions down the road even, and what you have to do to get there.
This is a really great question. And I definitely do urge everyone to really think about what your day-to-day life will be like at a health tech company versus maybe academia or a think tank or the government. I'll also call out that like a health tech startup is going to be different than a more established, like larger health tech company. And so it's good to think about what those differences might be. A piece of controversial advice that I really like that I've heard is follow your talents, not your dreams. And so that's something I think about. It's like, what are you actually good at? And what do you enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis? So when I was making a decision of health tech versus maybe a more traditional role for someone with my degree, I was like, I can't spend hours a day just doing work, heads down. I don't like the idea of working on grants or drafting papers. I really, and in a health tech company, it's very fast paced. It can be a bit chaotic. There's not a lot of structure, but I'm okay in that type of environment. I really love interacting with people who have different skill sets. And on a daily basis, I'll talk to like a platform engineer and an analytics engineer, someone from product, someone from marketing. And so that was a draw for me. And if you're not someone who might enjoy that, then, apply for a technical role in a startup or perhaps an academic environment. So I would just, again, it has more to do with you and how you want to spend your days, because we all spend a lot of time working. I will also call out that health tech startups in particular are not super secure, right? Like as I'm sure all of us have seen in the news, there are a lot of layoffs in tech and in startups in particular. That's a risk. So that's something I would think about. And then something we haven't talked about, but I think is also important to consider is salary, right? Like how important is it for you, for your life? A salary in a health tech space versus a non-health tech space. So there are lots of considerations, but I think the more people you talk to, the more types of organizations you look at, that will help. And the last thing I'll say is you have perhaps, at least in my case, less freedom to decide what you're going to work on in a day-to-day basis at a health tech company than you would in, let's say, academic research, which is what a lot of my people in my cohort are doing. They have more freedom in how they spend their day, what they focus on, what their long-term areas will be. They'll be at these academic institutions for years and years and years. So there are trade-offs, right? There are things that you sacrifice to go into health tech and vice versa. So I would just be really honest with yourselves in like, how important is it to do research? How important is it, the mission of the company, the culture of the company? Yeah, there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, that is a lot to think about. Thank you, Rosa. All of you have provided wonderful advice throughout this entire webinar, but what has been the best piece of career advice that each of you have ever received? Anyone who feels most comfortable can go first.
I think this might sound cliche, but I think really speaking up and thinking about what you want and being your authentic self. I think what you'll find is you might think, especially if you haven't been in one of these environments before, that you have to look a certain way or act a certain way or be a certain way. But actually, it's much better if you're yourself and come with your skills, the skills that you're confident in. As we talked about, there's work to be able to sell those skills and to position yourself the right way and communicate the right way. But, really knowing and being confident in what you bring is incredibly important. And I think will come across very positively in this way. And certainly that advice for me has been helpful in just thinking about getting into new roles, interviewing, but also in day-to-day meeting new people. I often interact with new people. And if you're open with yourself and you lead with yourself and your skills, it comes across really well and will get you. It will play well for you in your career.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, I think this is kind of similar to what Adam shared, but there's a lot of emphasis on leadership and career growth. And a lot of that sometimes can feel a little overwhelming. Like, oh, I have to have all these leadership skills. I have to have all these skills to move forward in life or your career. And I think one thing we don't really talk about is leadership can essentially be you in your authentic self and just capturing the skills that work best for you. It's about being authentic in yourself and just capturing those specific skills. It doesn't mean like what we all envision like a leader to be. You don't need to be, doing a TED talk on stage and wowing everyone, but the leadership comes from within yourself. And if you can focus on improving those skills and your confidence, it can really take you a lot further.
Thank you, Minnie.
Yeah, I think I already touched on just a piece of advice that has resonated with me, the whole follow your talents, not your dreams, which I understand might be a little controversial, but I think it helps, talents and also things you enjoy as opposed to what externally you might feel pressure to do, right? In a PhD program, often the dream is to be a professor, which is amazing. And I think that's a great path for a lot of people who have those talents. But if it's not for you, then just be honest and like, that's okay. As Manit said, not everyone has to be a leader or like a CEO. Like, for example, when you go into the health tech space, a lot of people ask me, they're like, oh, are you going to start your own startup? I was like, why would I? Like, no, I don't want to be a CEO and try to raise money and be really external facing. Those aren't my skills or what I enjoy doing. I'm much more interested in like operations and problem solving and management. So again, it's so personal. And so I would say, just think about, again, what do you want your life to be? What do you want your contributions to be? I really agree with I'm pointing at the two of you, but I guess that's not obvious. Being your authentic self, I think that's great advice and something perhaps we don't hear often enough. So yeah, I think that's great as well.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, everyone. I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer questions from the audience, but are there any final insights that you all would like to leave with the students, and how can people reach out to you if they want to connect or have any additional questions that they'd like to ask later?
I can go first on this one. Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to Hopkins students. I would say the easiest way to reach me is usually through LinkedIn. I will do my best to respond. Yes, in terms of last sort of items, it can be overwhelming. The health tech space is really large, as is all of the healthcare industry. Two specific sources of information I found helpful early on. One is Rock Health. They have a newsletter where they'll share health tech news, and at the bottom will say which companies have raised funding, which often is an indication of hiring. So that's like a good way of just getting some exposure. And another one is Health Tech Nerds. They have a Slack community, which is pretty large. It's about 2,000 people. And there are different channels where they talk about job opportunities, news, updates. It can be overwhelming, but it's great to get that exposure to that world if you're considering it. And they also have a newsletter. So those are two ways that you can start learning more.
Thank you, Rosa. And I noticed that Elizabeth has been putting links into the chat. She put the link to Rosa's LinkedIn profile and rockhealth.org and healthtechnerds.com. So thank you, Elizabeth. Manita and Adam, any final insights that you would like to leave with the students, and how can people stay connected with you?
Yeah, I would say similarly for me, LinkedIn is great. I would love to be as helpful as other people have been for me. I do want to touch upon a question that came in the chat about tech and sort of this economic instability, and health tech, especially more established companies versus, I can't speak to startups, tend to be a bit more insulated than the rest of tech. If that provides for any reassurance, but it's always important to sort of ask that question as you're perhaps interviewing, like what the stability of like how much longer can you pay that role, especially in tech. There's a certain terminology is how much longer can you pay that that role if you no longer get any more funding. But especially in more established health tech companies, it's a little bit more insulated.
Thank you.
Similar for me in terms of reaching out on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. And I'll try my best to respond to messages. I think in terms of advice, I think others have covered it pretty well. I think my representation here is probably more of the bigger pharmaceutical companies. So there are a million trade publications, a million resources out there in which you can kind of keep track of how the industry is growing and changing, which is constant, even for larger, more established companies. Certainly with COVID-19, things have completely shifted in many ways. One publication would be Endpoints. Take a look at that in terms of, seeing again how the overall industry plays and then developments in different disease areas.
Thank you, Adam. So, I noticed that there were some questions in the chat. Let's see. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. If it's, yeah, Carice or something else. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, but she asked, were any of you part of the patient safety and healthcare quality program at Hopkins? And she's wondering what options might be available for someone like her. She also has a project management certification.
I can say I was not part of that program. I would comment to say that the project management certification can be helpful, depending on what part of, again, like a pharmaceutical organization that you might want to be a part of. It's certainly seen as valuable, particularly in drug development and vaccine development.
Minnie and Rosa, do you have anything to add or? Okay, let's move
Yeah.
on to the, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say I was not part of that program, but I have found that exposure to quality of care has been super helpful. But I think, yeah, Adam's insight, given his field, is probably the most relevant.
Agreed, yeah. And then Maneet kind of addressed Mention's question about hiring freezes for tech and how's the environment for the healthcare industry related to that. Rosa and Adam, did you have anything to add to that about whether like health tech, whether in startups or in more established companies, are still hiring and what jobs are still available?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of changes. Last summer, there was a huge influx of people. I think there was so much demand for health tech talent. There were so many roles, and it sort of flipped in the last year. Now there's a lot of supply and far less demand because of the economy. I agree with what Maneet said. I think if you're at a larger, more established organization, you're shielded from a lot of that. There has been a lot of that challenge for startups just because they're getting less investment. And you've also seen these huge tech companies, right? Also outside of healthcare, also do layoffs. So it is a reality. I think there's still lots of jobs though. I see it being posted all of the time. So there it may be a little bit more of a challenging time, but I think, again, there are lots of opportunities, and everyone on this call, I'm sure, is very qualified. So don't let it be discouraging. But one insight that might be helpful is, I think if you're looking at startups, the stage of the startup that you're applying to will matter a lot for a variety of reasons. And I can talk about that more when there's more time. And then I would also look and see how much funding they've gotten, like Maneet said, like what their runway is, essentially, like how long they can fund their current staff, and like how dependent they are on external investments. Those are all very valid questions to ask. So yeah.
Thank you, Rosa.
I would just add around hiring. I think for the most part, many larger companies have been a little bit more shielded from the fears, I guess, that have caused a lot of the hiring freezes, for example. I would just generally say that this is always a risk. I think maybe Rosa had said this before, maybe Maneet, there's, as part of any of these positions, there's always a risk that the pendulum can swing, right? And things can change. And so while I say that firms are hiring now, it could change again in the future, but there are opportunities out there, certainly. So continue to look, continue to feel confident that you might be able to find a role.
Thank you all. That was very reassuring. Another person asked in the chat, for Maneet and Rosa, would you say getting your PhD gave you an edge in the work that you do now?
Yeah, I mean, it always depends on the role, but if they're looking for someone who has like PhD level scientific skills, then you've definitely got the skills.
I agree. I will call out for the, I think Maneet and I are in slightly different roles. Not everyone always knows what a PhD actually knows or what they do. But it does signal that you're an expert in the healthcare field that you're in, which has been very, very useful. And just the ability to talk about data, and think like a researcher has been really valuable. And I think, just to be perfectly honest, the credibility that comes with that, master's or PhD, has been helpful in certain spaces. You don't have to spend as much time proving things if you just come in with that, which is not bad. So yeah, it's been helpful.
Thank you. And then there's another question in the chat, this time for Adam. Can you tell us the most memorable or useful course that you ended up taking at Hopkins?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that in two ways. So one is like sort of foundational coursework around epidemiology and biostatistics. Those are sort of bread and butter that certainly have helped me in different ways in different careers. My most memorable course that I think I mentioned before was around vaccine development with Dr. Halsey, a difficult course, but it was a very, very detailed course that talked about different vaccine technologies. And it's even the case today that I still think about things that I learned, it's been almost 10 years since I've been there, that I've carried forward in my career today. So that's an example of, I would say, a more technical, content focused course that inspired me, I think, to be interested in vaccines, but also has been useful in my path.
Thank you. And then I also noticed Minnie put in the chat, she shouted out to the EPI series, and that it was critical to her skills as an epidemiologist. Like Rosa, you can answer this too. What courses ended up being like the most memorable and useful that you took at Hopkins?
Yeah, I think the biostatistics courses were by far the most useful, particularly Liz Stewart's class on causal inference. I found to be really valuable in just kind of understanding how all of that works. And it's something that came up at work the other day. Someone was like, I want to learn about propensity score matching. I was like, you should read anything that Liz Stewart has written. And then there was also a series on, I think, multi-level modeling, longitudinal, statistics, all of those types of technical courses are very, very valuable methods courses. So those are just more challenging to pick up on the fly. So I highly recommend those.
Thank you. Taking causal inference this spring, and I'm excited. A few other questions in the chat. How often do you work with people outside of your immediate team or field? And how important is it to know how to communicate with other colleagues, such as PR folks or lawyers?
I can jump in, and I would say very often. I'm in a very cross-functional role, and that just means, I work with people from research and development, legal, communications, external affairs, policy, et cetera, et cetera. And actually go back to one of the policy courses I took at Hopkins. And when you take these courses, the main thing around policy is thinking about what your stakeholder is thinking about, trying to come from their lens and think about what they want or need out of the conversation that you're having. So I think it's important to always come to any meeting, even if you know the person or not, thinking about what that stakeholder is interested in, what you're interested in, how you can collaborate together to reach goals.
Makes sense.
I would say 95% of my time is talking to other non-scientific experts. And that's me as the scientific expert, because you're there as a scientific expert. So you're kind of fulfilling that role. So I talk a lot with commercial sales, marketing, product engineers, also the oncologists. So practicing talking the science with non-science folks is really critical.
I very much agree with that. And this is a great question. Communication is so important, especially in technical roles, because it can be very difficult to communicate complex technical things in a clear way. So if you have that skill as a technical person, I think there are going to be so many opportunities, more opportunities for you. So it's definitely a good place to invest in communication, organization. I mean, I even see it in my role. If there are a team of data engineers and data scientists, and one person in particular is great at communicating, we'll put that person in a tech lead role if we're on a tight deadline, because we can rely on them to give us information that we need in the way that we need it. So yeah, the sort of, I don't love the term soft skills, but soft skills are often as important as the more technical skills.
Agreed. Yeah. I worked in data science and industry before coming here for grad school for my PhD, and that was one of the most important things that I learned, was that communication was just as, if not more important than the technical data science skills that I had, because you can do the most sophisticated analysis and get the most interesting results, but if you can't convey them well to the people who make the impact, to make the decisions, then it's pretty much all for naught, unfortunately. So We have time for one more quick question. If anyone wants to type one more final question into the chat, I'm sure our panelists would love to answer it before we all go. Tiffany, you can go. I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for this panel session. It's been very helpful. I just have this one little last question. So I recently have an opportunity to come across a person who is in research equity and healthcare, so very like business side of the healthcare, in charge of like acquisition and merging of companies. And I was asking him, what does he think about a PhD degree? So I'm an epidemiology master's student, and basically asking him, it would be like worth it or beneficial if I were to pursue a PhD degree in epidemiology. And what he said to me was, you know, like maybe questioning about everything or every decision that I've made before. Basically, he said, oh, like epidemiology or a health public health degree and PhD is not so valuable in the healthcare tech environment space. And so like I just want to, you know, ask about you guys, what's your thought on that? Because basically his perspective is on, oh, like tech is more focused on, you know, R&D people who had more hard skills, and more like business people who are in charge of policy and decision making. So would love to hear what are your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I can say you should do the PhD only if you really want to, if you like really want to dedicate the time and the energy and you have the passion for it. Because even in my company, you can move up to the role that I'm at a master's level, and you don't need the PhD. Is your job maybe slightly different? Sure. Can you do a lot of like investment during your time in the job to learn some of the PhD like skills? Yeah, you could. So I don't think it's critical that you like not pursue a career in health tech and like hold it off just to get a PhD. But the PhD is a much more personal like choice to make, and a long investment to make.
I agree with that. We'll also call out that everyone has their own bias, right? So Mani and I are biased as people with PhDs. I'm sure the person you talk to has his own bias as someone who doesn't have a PhD and may not really know what skills you develop, et cetera. But it's true that you don't need one for many of these roles. And so I get this question a lot of like, should I get a PhD or not? And I often say, if you can do the job that you want without one, maybe don't get it, because it is very, very challenging and a lot of time, and challenging in a way that it's for me, it was less academically challenging and more challenging in terms of like perseverance and discipline. But I will say I have no regrets getting it. The role I have right now, I don't need a PhD, but I would go back in time again and get it again. Because it helps me do my job so much better. So I agree, it is personal. But if you want to go into a more business type role in health tech, you have the knowledge you need as a master's student, then by all means, like avoid it if that makes sense for you. Thank you.
I'll just maybe jump in and say I'm the example here of not having a PhD, but working in a business space. I think, for me, I don't think it shuts down either pathway. I think both, if you have a PhD, if you don't, you can make it work. It depends on what you want at the end of the day. And for me personally, as I had said before, just think about what skills you actually need or want for the actual position. For me, I didn't go to business school. And so brushing up on my business skills and showing that I understood that space was actually the most important thing for that. And I'm someone who now works with probably colleagues that you're speaking about in business development or corporate development, et cetera. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I think this is a great note to end on. I see we're at 1:01 p.m. as well. So yeah, thank you, Adam, Manid, and Rosa, for your time, your wisdom, and your advice. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure all the students in attendance really appreciated it too. I'm seeing some thank you messages pop up in the chat. Thank you, Elizabeth, for organizing this, and Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you all will have a great rest of your day and wishing you the best and great success in whatever career path that you choose.
Thank you all, and thank you, Alyssa, for moderating. Great job. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and send it out when it's available, probably later today. And thank you all again for just taking time and being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.